In the serene and picturesque suburbs of Atlanta, Georgia, Griffin King's seemingly perfect life takes a devastating turn. A respected husband, Griffin's carefully crafted existence begins to unravel when his wife stumbles upon a haunting secret from his past. This revelation sets off a chain of events, culminating in a shocking murder that leaves the entire community reeling. This is the chilling tale of a man willing to go to extreme lengths to shield the truth he's worked tirelessly to bury. Griffin King was a man of meticulous control, but his journey began as Grace, a child growing up in a strict and conservative small town in Alabama. From a young age, Grace felt out of place in her own skin, grappling with a deep sense of confusion. Watching boys playing football on the field, she longed to be one of them, rather than conforming to the roles society imposed on her, dresses and dolls that never felt like they belonged. The weight of societal expectations pressed heavily on her until she finally broke free by leaving for college in Atlanta. There, far from the critical eyes of her hometown, Grace began a journey of self-discovery. In her early 20s, she made the life-changing decision to transition from female to male. The process was arduous, filled with emotional and physical challenges. Hormone therapy and surgeries paved the way for her transformation into Griffin, allowing her to embrace the identity she had always known to be her true self. By the age of 25, Griffin was fully living as a man. He carved out a successful career in construction management, a field that aligned with his desire to project strength and capability. No one questioned his past, no one suspected the story behind his transformation. In 2006, at the age of 29, Griffin met Hannah, a vibrant and kind-hearted woman who seemed to be his perfect match. Hannah's warmth, compassion, and unwavering optimism drew him in. She had grown up in a tight-knit family in Georgia and was deeply involved in her community, dedicating herself to volunteering and philanthropy. Her life was a testament to her generous spirit, and Griffin was captivated by her energy and kindness. Their connection blossomed quickly, and within a year, Griffin proposed. They married in an intimate ceremony in 2007, and Hannah's family embraced him wholeheartedly. To everyone around them, their life appeared idyllic: a loving marriage, a beautiful home, and shared dreams of starting a family. But beneath the surface, Griffin harbored a secret he vowed to take to his grave. He had never revealed his past to Hannah. The fear of losing her, of being seen as someone different, kept him silent. To Griffin, his old life as Grace was gone, erased. He convinced himself it didn't matter anymore. For years, Griffin played his role as the devoted husband flawlessly. Even Hannah, his closest confidant, was none the wiser. The truth about Griffin's past loomed over him like a shadow. As the years went by, his marriage with Hannah appeared steady on the surface, but subtle cracks began to form. The strain of living a double life weighed heavily on him, as he constantly feared that his secret might come to light. In early March of 2012, Griffin's carefully constructed world began to teeter when he met Steph Hart at a gym he had recently joined. Stephanie was younger, athletic, and exuded an effortless confidence that captivated everyone around her. Griffin was drawn to her vibrant energy, and what began as harmless flirtation quickly escalated into something more dangerous. By March 3rd, Griffin and Stephanie were entangled in a passionate affair. They met in secret, fueled by the thrill of the forbidden. For Griffin, the affair provided an intoxicating sense of freedom he hadn't felt in years. It was exhilarating, but also reckless. Hannah, ever perceptive and attuned to her husband, began to notice subtle changes in his behavior by mid-March. She couldn't quite pinpoint what was wrong, but something felt amiss. Griffin had grown distant, often coming home late with excuses about work projects. The warmth in their relationship seemed to have faded. He no longer reached for her in bed, and his affection had grown cold. On March 18th, Hannah confronted him, her voice tinged with both concern and suspicion. She asked about his late nights and emotional withdrawal. Griffin deflected her worries, attributing his behavior to stress from work. Hannah wanted desperately to believe him. After 6 years of marriage, she clung to the trust they had built. Yet, deep down, her instincts told her that something was very wrong. Over the next few weeks, Stephanie began to grow impatient. She resented being hidden away, and demanded more from Griffin, insisting he leave his wife. On March 28th, her frustration reached a breaking point. She threatened to expose their affair if Griffin didn't end his marriage with Hannah. Now caught in an agonizing dilemma, Griffin felt his life spiraling out of control. If the affair were revealed, the facade he had carefully maintained would crumble. But the affair wasn't the only threat to his carefully guarded life. Stephanie had no idea about his past, about his transition. Griffin was terrified that if Hannah discovered his betrayal, it would only be a matter of time before his deepest secret was exposed. By April 5th, Hannah's suspicions had grown too heavy to ignore. Griffin's behavior had become increasingly secretive. He was taking phone calls in whispers, leaving the house at odd hours, and offering vague explanations. That evening, when Griffin claimed he had to handle an urgent late-night work matter, Hannah decided to follow him. Keeping a safe distance, she trailed his car to a motel on the outskirts of town. From her vantage point, she watched as Griffin met with a woman. Her chest tightened as they disappeared together into the building. She waited outside, time dragging on unbearably, until Griffin finally emerged hours later. The betrayal was undeniable. Hannah drove home in stunned silence, her thoughts racing. She didn't confront him immediately. Instead, she tried to process what she had seen. Anger and heartbreak mingled with a gnawing sense of curiosity. That night, after Griffin had fallen asleep, Hannah resolved to dig deeper. She slipped into his study, her hands trembling as she searched through his belongings. Eventually, she found a locked drawer. Breaking it open, she discovered a cache of documents that would forever alter her understanding of her husband. Amid old papers and hidden files, Hannah uncovered medical records dating back to a time before they had met. The records bore a name she didn't recognize: Grace King. As she pored over the documents, the truth began to take shape. The files chronicled Griffin's transition from female to male, revealing a past he had kept hidden for years. Hannah felt her world collapse around her. Not only had she discovered Griffin's infidelity, but now she was faced with the realization that the man she had married had concealed an even deeper secret. The weight of the deception was unbearable. She sat alone in the study, her hands shaking as she grappled with the revelation that her entire marriage had been built on a foundation of lies. On the night of April 7, 2012, Griffin returned home, parking in the driveway of their suburban house. A deep unease had been growing inside him for days. His affair with Stephanie had spiraled out of control, and Griffin was painfully aware of how reckless he had been. The illusion of control he thought he could maintain was slipping through his fingers. The turmoil in Griffin's mind was overwhelming, but the reality of his situation was even worse. Each moment he spent with Stephanie seemed to edge him closer to losing everything he had worked so hard to build. Griffin had spent years meticulously shaping his life, first as Grace, then as the man he became after his transition. For him, the only way to survive was to leave the past behind and never look back. Meeting Hannah had felt like the final, perfect piece of his puzzle. She was warm, trusting, and deeply in love with him. Their life together was supposed to be flawless, a sanctuary of stability and love. But now, with the affair threatening to unravel everything, and Hannah's growing suspicions, Griffin could feel the walls of his carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. Earlier that evening, Griffin had met Stephanie in an attempt to end their affair for good. But Stephanie wasn't willing to let go so easily. She demanded more: commitment, a future together. Griffin, torn between fear and desperation, couldn't give her what she wanted. The thought of losing Hannah and having his past exposed consumed him with dread. Stephanie's ultimatum, her threat to reveal everything if he didn't leave his wife, lingered in his mind like a ticking time bomb. As he left the motel that night, Griffin was suffocated by the weight of his choices. The life he had worked tirelessly to create felt as though it was slipping through his fingers. When Griffin stepped through the front door of their home, he immediately knew something was wrong. The house was unusually silent, the familiar warmth absent. Still, he could feel Hannah's presence before he even saw her. She was waiting for him, standing in the living room, her face etched with heartbreak and anger. In her hands were the documents, the medical records she had uncovered. They were undeniable proof of Griffin's transition, the secret he had hidden for years. Everything he had fought to keep buried was now out in the open. Hannah had spent days piecing together the truth, discovering the affair had been devastating enough, but uncovering the hidden chapters of Griffin's life, the fact that he had never shared such a profound part of himself with her, was a betrayal that shattered her. In that moment, she felt as though the man she had loved, the man she had built her life with, had never truly existed. It wasn't just about the infidelity, it was the lies, the deception, and the realization that she had never really known her husband. As she confronted him, the tension in the room was suffocating. Griffin's first instinct was to deny everything, clinging to the fragile threads of his self-preservation. But as Hannah demanded the truth with unrelenting determination, he broke. Griffin confessed to the affair and, with trembling words, revealed the secret he had kept for so long. He told her about his transition, about the person he had been before they met. He tried to explain why he had hidden it, why he had chosen not to tell her, desperately attempting to justify his actions. But it was already too late. Hannah was devastated. The life she thought she had built with Griffin had been nothing more than an intricate web of lies. Her mind raced as she tried to comprehend the scale of his deception. Fury and heartbreak swirled within her as she threatened to leave him and expose his hidden past to everyone they knew. For Griffin, the rising panic was unbearable. The thought of his carefully hidden past becoming public, the fear of his meticulously constructed life collapsing, consumed him. He had spent years burying his old identity, striving for normalcy and maintaining the image of a perfect life. If Hannah exposed him, it would all fall apart. His career, his reputation, and the identity he had worked so hard to forge. As Hannah turned to leave the house, Griffin's desperation overtook him. In a moment of uncontrollable rage, driven by fear and the need to protect his secret, he grabbed a knife from the kitchen. What happened next unfolded in a blur of fury and panic. Consumed by his emotions, he struck out at her, the knife plunging again and again. Each blow was more frantic than the last, as if silencing her could somehow preserve the fragile illusion of his life. The scene quickly descended into horror. Blood pooled across the kitchen floor, and the home, once filled with love and warmth, was now a hauntingly silent crime scene. Hannah lay lifeless, and the weight of Griffin's actions pressed down on him like an unbearable force. As the reality of what he had done began to sink in, Griffin stood motionless, staring at the irreversible damage. He had taken the life of the woman who had loved him unconditionally, who had trusted him with her heart. Yet, in his mind, he rationalized it as the only option. If she had left, if she had exposed his past, his entire world would have been destroyed. On April 8, 2012, the morning after the murder, Griffin woke early, his mind spinning with the horror of the previous night. He knew what he had to do. No one could discover the truth. He had to make it appear as something else, anything but what had really happened. As the first light of dawn crept through the windows, Griffin began the cover-up. He spent hours meticulously scrubbing the scene, erasing fingerprints, and orchestrating the illusion of a burglary gone wrong. Drawers were ransacked, a window was smashed, and the back door was left ajar to mimic forced entry. By the time Griffin called the police, the staged scene was complete. By midday, Griffin placed the call, his voice trembling as he feigned shock and terror, telling the dispatcher that he had returned home to find his wife murdered. Within minutes, the first responders arrived, and the tranquil suburban neighborhood transformed into an active crime scene. Neighbors gathered outside, whispering in hushed tones, struggling to process the horror unfolding in their community. Griffin played his role flawlessly, portraying the grief-stricken husband, answering investigators' questions while masking his guilt with a facade of devastation. At first, the detectives accepted his story. The scene, as Griffin had staged it, appeared convincing. A robbery gone wrong, a tragic but seemingly straightforward case. But Griffin's fragile web of lies began to unravel within days. On April 10, 2012, Stephanie Hart, still unaware of the murder, became frustrated and suspicious. Griffin had been avoiding her since that fateful night, failing to return her calls. Feeling neglected and eager for answers, she showed up at his house, demanding to know why he had been ignoring her. Her unexpected arrival only added to the immense pressure Griffin was under. Struggling to maintain his composure, Griffin assured Stephanie that everything was fine. Yet her persistence gnawed at him, fueling his paranoia that his carefully concealed truths were on the brink of exposure. By April 15th, the detectives working the case started noticing cracks in Griffin's story. Neighbors, who had always regarded Griffin and Hannah as the ideal couple, came forward with troubling accounts. They admitted to hearing loud arguments from the house on the night of the murder, contradicting Griffin's claims of a peaceful, loving home. Hannah's close friends also stepped forward, revealing alarming details. Just days before her death, Hannah had confided in them, hinting that she had uncovered something deeply unsettling about Griffin. One friend recounted a particularly emotional conversation where Hannah expressed doubts about her marriage, alluding to secrets she was grappling with. As detectives pieced together these accounts, the narrative of a simple burglary began to fall apart. Subtle inconsistencies at the crime scene raised red flags. Items appeared misplaced in ways that felt unnatural for a burglary. The supposed break-in showed no convincing evidence of forced entry. These details, combined with Griffin's increasingly erratic behavior, pushed the detectives to probe deeper. By April 18, 2012, the pressure on Griffin was reaching a breaking point. The detectives brought him in for further questioning, their suspicions growing as the evidence painted a damning picture. Griffin, once so composed, was starting to falter. His carefully curated alibi began to crumble under scrutiny. The narrative he had spun, a tragic robbery gone wrong, was no longer holding up against the mounting evidence. As the questioning intensified, the weight of Griffin's lies pressed down on him, and the noose of his deception tightened. It was only a matter of time before the truth would be laid bare. Griffin's carefully rehearsed responses began to falter as the detectives pressed harder. His once composed demeanor started to unravel, his distracted state betraying the turmoil in his mind as he clung desperately to the story he had fabricated. Small inconsistencies began to surface. He contradicted himself on seemingly minor details, times he claimed he was at work, specific conversations he said he had with Hannah. But as the questioning intensified, these small cracks widened, exposing the lies beneath. The tipping point came when investigators retrieved Hannah's phone from the crime scene. Among her saved files, they discovered an unsent message she had drafted just days before her murder. The contents of that draft exposed everything: Griffin's affair, the revelation of his transgender identity, and the emotional struggle Hannah had endured after uncovering his secret. The detectives pieced together that Hannah had likely been planning to confide in a close friend, trying to make sense of her husband's hidden double life. The unsent message provided the final link the detectives needed. It confirmed their suspicions that Griffin's secrets ran far deeper than infidelity. It was these secrets, they realized, that had ultimately cost Hannah her life. With mounting evidence, the story of a botched burglary no longer held water. The detectives moved decisively. On April 20th, 2012, Griffin was arrested at his home in the early hours of the morning. The arrest was quiet, but its implications were monumental. As Griffin was led away in handcuffs, his mind raced with the weight of what was to come. Soon, his neighbors, friends, and colleagues would learn the truth. The life he had meticulously built was about to be shattered, his secrets exposed for all to see. During his interrogation, Griffin clung stubbornly to his initial narrative, insisting he had discovered Hannah's lifeless body after an intruder had broken into their home. But the detectives were no longer buying it. As the hours wore on and the questions became sharper, Griffin felt the pressure mounting. The walls were closing in, and he knew the truth couldn't remain hidden much longer. Finally, after relentless questioning, Griffin broke down. He confessed to the murder, though he claimed it had been an accident, a moment of panic and blind rage. He admitted to the affair, revealed his transgender past, and expressed his fear that the truth about him would destroy the life he had painstakingly created. The trial of Griffin King began on May 3, 2012, capturing the nation's attention and becoming a media circus. The courtroom was packed daily with reporters, curious spectators, and people who had once been part of Griffin and Hannah's lives. The suburban community, which had admired Griffin for his professional success and seemingly perfect marriage, was left in shock as the layers of his life were peeled back. each day in court brought new revelations. Hidden identities, betrayal, and murder dominated the headlines. The double life Griffin had fought so hard to conceal was now laid bare, his secrets becoming fodder for public consumption. For Griffin, the trial wasn't just about the murder, it was the exposure of a life built on lies, a carefully constructed facade now irreparably shattered. The trial was a harrowing ordeal for Griffin. The secret of his transgender identity, which he had worked tirelessly to keep hidden, became a focal point of the prosecution's case. The prosecutor painted a damning portrait of Griffin as someone who had spent his entire life cloaked in deception, hiding his true self even from his wife. They argued that when Hannah unearthed the truth, Griffin, desperate to protect the life he had built, chose murder as his escape. The prosecution presented Griffin as a man consumed by the need to control his narrative. The pressures of his affair with Stephanie, combined with the fear of exposure, were described as catalysts that drove him to a desperate and irreversible act. On May 20, 2012, Stephanie Hart was called to the stand. Shaken and emotional, she recounted the details of her affair with Griffin. She explained how she had fallen for his fabricated story, believing he was a man stuck in a loveless marriage, unaware of the hidden complexities of his past. Learning about his transgender identity during the trial left her feeling betrayed and manipulated. Stephanie's raw testimony painted a vivid picture of Griffin's tangled relationships and the lengths he had gone to maintain control over his double life. As the trial unfolded, the jury saw Griffin's life in its entirety. A man so terrified of losing his constructed reality that he was willing to kill to protect it. The prosecution's case was methodical and unrelenting, and the evidence against Griffin was overwhelming. By June 15, 2012, Griffin was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His fall from grace was swift and devastating. The life he had meticulously crafted was stripped bare for the world to see, leaving behind a man trapped by his lies, unable to escape the consequences of his actions. The aftermath of Griffin's conviction sent shockwaves through the community. Friends of Hannah, who had always seen her marriage as ideal, struggled to reconcile the truth with the image they had held for years. They reflected on whether they had missed any signs of her distress in the days leading up to her death, and questioned whether they could have done anything to prevent the tragedy. The revelation of Griffin's transgender identity, the affair, and the murder shattered the community's perception of the seemingly perfect couple. Many felt guilt and disbelief, their faith in their ability to recognize trouble in those around them shaken. Stephanie Hart, too, was left devastated. She had been unwittingly drawn into Griffin's web of lies, becoming a player in the events that culminated in Hannah's death. The affair had consumed her life, and now, as the truth came to light, she was left grappling with regret and public scorn. The media labeled her the other woman, and she became the subject of relentless gossip. Her involvement in the scandal altered her life irrevocably, leaving her a shadow of the person she once was. As for Griffin, life behind bars became his new normal. The man who had spent his life hiding from his past was now forced to confront it daily. In the solitude of his prison cell, he was haunted by the choices that had led him to this point. He thought of Hannah, the woman who had loved him unconditionally, and the life he had so carelessly destroyed to protect his own secrets. The lies, the deception, and the fear that had consumed him were now his only companions. The once proud man, determined to shield himself from the truth, was left to wrestle with the enormity of his actions. The trial became a cautionary tale in the community, a stark reminder of the destructive power of secrecy and deception. Those who had admired Griffin now saw him as a tragic figure, consumed by fear and insecurity. The story of the King family echoed for years, a lesson in how quickly a life built on lies could unravel. Alone in his prison cell, Griffin relived that fateful night repeatedly, haunted by the image of Hannah lying lifeless on the kitchen floor. The memory became an unrelenting shadow, a constant reminder of the price he had paid. As the days turned into years, Griffin often asked himself whether it had all been worth it, whether protecting his secret had been worth destroying everything he had. But deep down, he already knew the answer. The echoes of his lies reverberated endlessly, a testament to the truth he had tried and failed to escape. and a life irreparably shattered by his own hand.